Great. Like, okay, there we go. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. We are recording this for our YouTube channel later. So if you have to leave or you know someone else who wants to watch it, it'll be uploaded there. I wanted to please introduce Amy Gulick, who will be talking about her Environmental Impact Award project, the Salmon Way. And so Amy Gulick is a photographer, author, and public speaker. She is the recipient of multiple awards from conservation and travel foundations, and her images and stories have been featured in Smithsonian, Audubon, National Wildlife, Sierra, and Outdoor Photographer. Gulick is a founding fellow of the International League of Conservation Photographers, a fellow of the International League of Conservation Writers, and a senior fellow of the Safina Center. As a resident of Whidbey Island in the Salish Sea of Washington State, Gulick has spent extensive time exploring the Northwest Coast and Alaska. All right, Amy, go for it.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and welcome. I was going to say good morning to everyone because I'm 3 hours behind you, but I'll say good afternoon to all
I
of you.
know.
I'm assuming you're on East Coast time. I just want to thank the Roger Tory Peterson Institute and Rachel for making this possible and for showing my images at the Institute right now as part of a larger exhibit. It's wonderful to have not just my work out there, but the work that I do is always trying to help some kind of cause, and in this case, it would be salmon in Alaska, which you're going to learn all about. So before I share my screen and get into the slides, just a little bit about me and my background. I'm a writer and photographer. I tell real life stories. I don't make things up. But how do I decide which stories to pursue? Because these stories can take a long time to to come to anything. So this particular one, the Salmon Way that you're going to see today, this was a 5-year project to get just the book into my hands. And then, yeah, we've since gone on to make an exhibit, and then I do a lot of outreach events. So, anyway, it takes a long time. And I have ideas all the time. They come to me, but most of them leave after 24 hours. And it's the ones that stick, I think, are the ones that I end up pursuing. But again, how do I even get those ideas? Well, sometimes I read something or I have a conversation or an experience that sparks my curiosity. And a number of years ago, I had a conversation with an Alaska Indigenous woman. Very random, very brief. We didn't know each other, and it was kind of a short conversation. But just that conversation, I think, really got me on the path to starting this project and the book, The Salmon Way. And this conversation, it's included in the book. And I'd like to read just a part of it to you now. And I'm going to share my screen so you can look at something more pleasing. Uh, okay. No, not the Zoom screen. Not that. Not that. Okay. Okay, Rachel, let me know. Can you see that? Should be okay. It's the cover and okay. All right. Well, let's get started here. Yeah. Okay. This is what happens. This is the weird thing on Zoom. Then I can't use my cursor once I share the screen, which I don't need, but that's the weird part to me. I just want to make sure, Rachel, so you can see the cover. Can you see like the whole like film strip of people on the side? Or
No.
I'm seeing that.
Yeah, so I just see the cover with like the black bars on the
Okay.
side.
All right. Just want to make sure you guys are just seeing images. So,
Yeah.
okay. Stroking a thick white mountain goat hide placed next to a loom, I watch master weaver Terry Rothgar create a robe traditionally made from the animal's wool. Next to the hide are strips of spruce root, raw materials for her exquisite woven basket, also on display. Terry tells stories about her Tlingit Raven ancestors as her expert fingers weave a beautiful design. And I say to her, with such plentiful resources in your homeland, it's easy to see how your ancestors thrived. And she stops what she's doing. She puts everything down. She looks me straight in the eye and she says, resources. Mountain goats and trees aren't resources. We have relationships with the goat and the tree. Since time immemorial, Terry tells me, her people have lived along the forested coast of what is today southeast Alaska, rich with spruce and cedar trees, mountain goats, salmon, bears, ravens, and eagles. To make items using spruce root and cedar bark, the people carefully harvested the roots and bark so that the trees could continue to live. Today, weavers use the same harvesting techniques. They knew the optimal time of year to hunt the mountain goat, so the animal's coat was in the best condition. And in addition to mountain goat wool, they also used the hide, horns, and meat. And I wonder how Terry's ancestors, thousands of years ago, had the foresight to harvest bark or roots so as not to kill the trees. The forest must have seemed endless and in a constant state of regeneration in this soggy climate. But this mindfulness speaks to the difference between resources and relationships. When people live with deep connections to the land, water, animals, and plants that sustain them, it's impossible not to respect and develop relationships with trees, goats, salmon, and more. Resources, on the other hand, tend to refer to end products, commodities. It's tough to have a relationship with lumber, copper tubing, or frozen fish sticks. So, again, I think it was that chance encounter, brief conversation with Terry about relationships that sparked a lot of questions in my mind. And that's how a story usually starts for me, with questions. So, here's a question for all of you. If I asked you what your relationship with salmon is, what would you say? And what kind of a question is that to ask somebody? What is your relationship with salmon? Well, it's the question that compelled me to go to Alaska and to show up at the homes, boats, and fish camps of complete strangers. I was intrigued that there's still a place in this world where the lives of people and salmon are linked. And I wanted to know what the lives of people are like who have relationships with these remarkable fish. So, after several years of asking Alaskans this question, I came back with the stories and photographs that you'll find in my book, The Salmon Way. And I'm going to highlight just a few of them here today. I'm very grateful to the people who open their homes and hearts, and they've allowed me to share their stories with all of you. And I do encourage you to somehow either buy the book, borrow the book, ask your library to carry it, because again, I only have time to get into a few stories, and there's so many more stories in this book, and every single one of them is just heart. It's so heartfelt. I could have worked on this book for the rest of my life because it was just such an honor to sit down with people and really get to know about their relationship with salmon. Okay, so where to start? Well, here's a rather mind-boggling map of Alaska. This documents close to 20,000 streams, rivers, and lakes, all shown here in blue, where you can find salmon. Now, keep in mind that this number is believed to represent only a fraction of the waters actually used by salmon. And keep in mind that Alaska is enormous. It's more than twice the size of the state of Texas. So I'd like to point out a few places I'll be talking about so you can orient yourself. Bristol Bay down here, this is in southwest Alaska. That whole watershed that feeds into the bay there, that's about the size of the state of Kentucky. Down here, this is known as Southeast Alaska. This is about the size of the state of West Virginia, and it contains major transboundary rivers, the Taku, the Stikine, and the Unik. And when I say transboundary, I mean that they originate in Canada, in this case in British Columbia, and they drain into Alaska, coming into the United States that way. And up here, this is the Kuskokwim Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. The Kuskokwim River drains into that, as does the Yukon River. The Yukon River is the third longest river in North America, and that delta alone is one of the largest deltas in the entire world. It's important to note, too, the Yukon River is also transboundary, originating in Canada. So when I look at this map, what I see is a living landscape, a beating heart whose arteries of life are all of those blue waterways. What you can't see on this map are the salmon pulsing through those waterways, bringing life to bears, birds, plants, and people and communities. Everywhere I went, Alaskans told me that salmon are their lifeblood. So, salmon, they start their lives in fresh water, they head out to the ocean to mature, and if all goes well, they return to their freshwater birth streams as adults to spawn the next generation, and then they die. That is the life cycle of Pacific salmon. So, in between the beginning and end of their lives, a lot can happen. And at the end of their lives, they pass something on to the next generation, not unlike us. In between the beginning and end of our lives, a lot can happen. And what did we pass on? Can salmon teach us something about ourselves? So, when you start poking your nose into people's relationships, you never know what you might learn. In the native village of Napaimute, I poke my head inside the low doorway of a smokehouse. It's dim with a smoky haze, but the bright orange flesh of salmon illuminates and fills the space. Shelley Leary, she's hanging salmon strips on double hung racks, and she tells me, I was taught to always be ready, to have food for the winter. I feel poor when I don't have food put up. When the smokehouse is filled, I feel good because I know I have enough. So it's mid-June, and among the season's first salmon, we speak in lowered voices, respectful of the bounty before us. The aroma of smoked fish permeates my skin, clothing, and the pleasure center of my brain. I feel a great sense of comfort here. I'm not really sure why. Never having to think too much about where my food comes from or the possibility of its scarcity, how could I begin to understand Shelley's feeling of well-being that comes with a full smokehouse? So we're on the Kuskokwim River. This is 255 miles upstream from its mouth. The village population here of less than 100 is seasonal, with most people, including Shelley's family, arriving when the salmon do. The rest of the year, she lives downriver in Bethel, population 6,000, accessible only by airplane or boat. And she tells me a story of when she was in Seattle for a few days. A friend from Alaska was with her, and they walked around the big city looking at all the tall buildings and the crowds of people. And she says, we wondered what all those people would do when something bad happened. What would all of those people eat? We were glad we were going home soon. And this is home for Shelley. And this is just a postage stamp size of that immense Yukon Kuskokwim River Delta where she lives. So I think that that's the difference between my and Shelley's comfort derived from her full smokehouse. Mine is immediate gratification, delicious food right now. Hers is long-term security, food for the winter, like money in the bank. I live under the delusion that there will always be food, even though I'm not growing, fishing, hunting, or storing it. Shelley lives under no such pretense. So, who is the wiser? And who is rich? And what is wealth? Shelley is Gulick, an Alaska native, and she and her family are among the 18% of Alaskans considered subsistence users of Alaska's fish and wildlife. Now, for thousands of years, Alaska natives have fished, hunted, and gathered as a way of life. And today, approximately 130,000 rural residents, both natives and non-natives, still rely on fish and wildlife, harvesting on average close to 300 pounds per person a year. And fish account for more than half of this amount. There's really no other place in the United States that's wild and abundant enough that a significant number of people can still live this way. Now, most of us are thousands of years removed from the ways of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So today's concept of subsistence in Alaska, it's often misunderstood. The word itself implies a meager existence, but most Alaskans who live this way of life consider themselves rich people. I heard that word over and over again. We are rich. And they fight hard to maintain the right to continue their customary and traditional ways. Now, an outsider like me could see this as a food security issue, but I've come to learn that it is much more than that. It's about people whose identities, cultures, and connections to the land, waters, their ancestors, elders, children, and each other revolve around fishing, hunting, gathering, sharing, and respecting food and where it comes from, and teaching the next generations to do the same. Salmon bring people together. They keep people together. 3 generations of this family gather at their fish camp on the Kuskokwim River. So let's meet another family from Juneau in southeast Alaska, whose 3 generations gather because of salmon. Heather Hardcastle, she's standing there in the middle wearing the yellow suspenders. And she tells me that her fondest childhood memory is riding in a skiff in the long twilight of an Alaska summer evening. With salt spray and the smell of spruce trees in the air, the boat whisked her to sea, spawning salmon near the Taku River. And she says, I'll never forget the joy I felt dragging my hands through the water, touching the backs of all those beautiful fish as sheer granite peaks towered over us. Heather's parents, Pete and Sheila, they're on the left. They fished the Taku River and they sold salmon commercially in the summers. And they brought young Heather, her brother, and the family dog along on their boat, named after Heather. And she tells me that she grew up eating salmon every day in every way. So baked, boiled, in burgers, salads, and even something called salmon pie, which she wasn't terribly fond of. It wasn't until she left Alaska to attend college in North Carolina that she fully appreciated the abundance of salmon that still exists in her home state and the way of life it allows commercial fishing families to live. Heather's husband, Kirk, is sitting in front of her with their daughter, Kieli. He's an ocean and seafood lover from Northern California, and he grew up in a culture that revolves around high quality, locally produced food. So when he began to fish commercially with Heather's family, he quickly saw the potential to bring superb fish directly to restaurants, specialty markets, and consumers who wanted a direct connection with their food and the fishermen. So together with two friends, Renee and Winston, they're on the right there with their daughter Athena, they formed Taku River Reds. This is a company that prides itself on honoring both the fish and the fishermen by providing high quality wild Alaska salmon and supporting a way of life for fishing families. Heather advises an international coalition called Salmon Beyond Borders that works to conserve her home stream, the Taku River, along with other transboundary salmon rivers that straddle the United States-Canada border. And she says, these rivers are our lifeblood. My dad has always said to evaluate any proposed activity or development through the lens of salmon. Whatever is good for salmon is going to be good for the environment, community, and economy. Now, I've been fortunate to spend time with Heather's family, sharing delicious salmon, laughter, and hopes for the future. Grateful for the life salmon have given them, Heather and Kirk are raising their daughter, Kieli, on salmon every day in every way. And in the long twilight of summer, near the Taku River, they ride by skiff to the place where the salmon and their family have always gathered. Now, for thousands of years, people have always gathered where there are salmon. In Bristol Bay in southwest Alaska, the annual return of the world's largest run of sockeye salmon triggered a great migration of native people who came for the seasonal bounty and to renew ties with family and friends. Today, the migration of both salmon and people continues in Bristol Bay, home for the past century to a thriving commercial fishery. People come for the seasonal bounty and to renew ties with family and friends. Melanie Brown, she's on the left in red. She has migrated with her family to Bristol Bay every one of her 50 plus summers. Melanie is Alaska native. Her ancestors are Yupik, Aleut, and Inupiaq. She inherited her great grandfather's commercial fishing site near the Naknek River. This is one of 9 rivers that feeds into Bristol Bay. So there are 2 ways that commercial fish in Bristol Bay, set netting and drift netting. Melanie is a set netter. So set netters, they fish close to shore from a fixed location and many use skiffs. Drift netters, they use bigger boats and they can fish anywhere within the legal boundaries. Now, some set netters, they don't use boats at all and they fish from the beach. And as one beach set netter told me, most of the time it's plain, hard, miserable work in the cold, in the wind, in the rough waters, in the rain, in the mud, with bugs, little sleep, and improper nourishment for days on end. So the Bristol Bay fishery is incredibly intense. Why? Well, an enormous volume of salmon pulses into the bay in a very short period of time. Since the 1960s, an average of 33 million fish return every year. The season I visited, close to 60 million fish returned. Now, most salmon runs in Alaska happen over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, but here, 80 to 90% of the run comes in just 20 days. With salmon showing up in mass and limited hours to catch them, it's all hands on deck, and sleep isn't something that one can afford to do much of. For Melanie in the middle, commercial fishing in Bristol Bay, it's a business, but it's rooted in family. Her dad captains his own drift boat. Her sister's family fishes their own set net site. And Melanie and her mother is on the left and she's in her 70s. They fish their 2 set net sites together. And Melanie's 14-year-old daughter, Mari, who's on the right, she started fishing the season that I visited. And Melanie tells me, I feel like I'm living a legacy, a continuation of a river flowing in time. The Naknek is my family's home stream, and I'm grateful it has given us life for so long. I want that to continue for my children and their descendants. So I spent a day on Melanie's skiff watching just how physically demanding set netting can be. There's no mechanical gear on this boat to help them pull in this very heavy net, and the net empty without fish is already really heavy. So you can imagine when it's loaded with fish. Everything on her boat is muscle powered. There's, again, no mechanical gear. So you set, pull, pick the net, repeat for 6 to 8 hours. You try to get some rest in between fishing openings, and you do it all again the next tide and the next until the season ends. At the end of the day, Melanie invites me um, to the family home. Sorry, Rachel, I think I just saw someone else was trying to get in. Were you able to let them in? Okay,
Yeah,
just
sorry, I just let her
okay.
in.
I didn't know if I needed to do it. So
Yeah,
sorry
no,
about
you're safe.
that. So again, at the end of the day, Melanie invites me over to the family home for a dinner of moose spaghetti and birthday cake for her 8-year-old son Oliver, who's down there on the right amidst all those women. And I ask everyone in the family, what does salmon mean to you? Tell me about your relationship with salmon. And the answers come rapid fire. Food, home, family, opportunity, education, blessing, and work ethic. And Melanie tells me that when she was young, she started asking fundamental questions. I think questions we all ask at some point, like, what's the meaning of life and why are we here? And she says, there are certain events that mark our lives, and at the end, that's it. But there's the hope that we're passing something on too. You look at salmon and how much they pass on, not only to their offspring, but to the whole system that they're a part of and benefit. And I think a human who has lived life well does that too. So we've seen how salmon benefit people who catch and sell them for their livelihood and people who rely on them for a substantial part of their diet and culture. They also benefit people who make a living as sport fishing guides. John Yeager, he's on the right. He lives in Wrangell near the mouth of the Transboundary Stikine River in southeast Alaska. And he takes people on his boat to fish for salmon in the ocean. And he says, I'm not so much trying to fill the freezers of my clients, I'm trying to fill their minds with memories. There are many firsts on my boat. First time in Alaska, first time catching a salmon, or first time fishing with a grandchild. I like that I can provide experiences that will stay with people forever. So, John grew up in a small town in Ohio, and his family owned a grocery store. And he tells me that when he was young, if he wanted ice cream or T-bone steaks, he'd just go to the family store and grab what he needed. There was no exchange of money. And he never really understood where food came from or what it took to get it. When he came to Alaska, though, he married into a family that homesteaded on the Stikine River and fishes and hunts as a way of life. And he says, living the way we do in Alaska, I think a lot about food, especially salmon. When my family catches a salmon, we give some to my wife's parents and to an elderly neighbor, and then we share the rest together. We've done the job the fish wanted us to do with it, and that's important. It's not just the sustenance of the fish, it's the spirit of the fish. Heidi Wild, shown here with her 14-year-old son Lane. She's a sport fishing guide in Bristol Bay, and she takes clients all over this immense region to fish for salmon and trout. She guides people March through October, and so she sees salmon at both the beginning and the end of their lives. And she says, the moment that salmon eggs hatch, the fight to survive and thrive is on. The fish make their way to the ocean and they face limitless perils. They stay gone until they're called home. They don't quit swimming in the middle of their return home simply because they face obstacles. They keep moving forward, tirelessly, devoted, inspiring, just like most of us. So Heidi, myself, and two others, we fly in a small float plane soaring over the vast tundra with its countless creeks, lakes, and rivers. It's late August, and while the frenzy of the Bristol Bay commercial fishing season for people ended in mid-July, the frenzy of the spawning season for salmon is in full swing in the many tributaries upstream from the mouth of the bay. The pilot lands on a lake, and we hike to a creek jammed with tomato red sockeye, nearing the end of their lives. But we are not here for the salmon. We are here because of salmon. Rainbow and Dolly Varden trout grow big and fat here, feasting on salmon eggs, salmon carcasses, and young salmon that emerge in the spring. We cross the creek and a wall of crimson sockeye opens and streams along both sides of us. The water sings with the riffles of the shallows and the ripples of the salmon swaying in the current. We cast into the water, into our minds, fishing for whatever this way comes. Few words are exchanged. The shared connection to the land, the fish, and the crisp air bonds us together better than words ever could. Time slows. What matters is what's happening now, not what happened years ago or what might happen tomorrow. Heidi peers toward the bank of the creek and she says, is that a bear? My inner calm is disrupted by her voice, but all that matters is what's happening now. And what's happening now is that a bear has come between our group. This is not an ideal scenario, and it's one that we've been so careful to avoid all day, but there he is. So he creeps into the creek and he turns broadside to us. This is a polite and rather effective way of intimidating his neighbors by showing us his size. We give the bear space, he ambles upstream a little ways, he stops, and he turns broadside again. I think maybe he's trying to tell us that we've overstayed our welcome in his dining room. We clump together and we splash across the creek. Salmon bodies are thrashing against our legs. Their boots hit dry ground and we begin to scramble up a steep bank, bashing through a wall of willows. Finally, we reach the top. And then the laughter begins. Laughter at the bushwhack up the bank, laughter at ourselves for fleeing the scene, and laughter because it's exhilarating to be in this staggeringly beautiful place, sharing this world-class moment with new friends. So, bears and salmon go together, and so do many other species that salmon benefit. At every stage of their life cycle, salmon are a life force that feeds something. The salmon circle of life radiates to support at least 100 different species, including us. You spend enough time around salmon and you realize that they're in everything. They're in bears, birds, marine mammals, and people. They're even in trees. Now, I hope you're scratching your heads and asking, well, how does this happen? Is this how it happens? Is this salmon in the trees? No, technically, this is salmon up a tree. So, how the heck do salmon get in the trees? Well, in the great salmon forests of the Tongass National Forest in southeast Alaska, scientists have found high concentrations of a nitrogen variant in trees near salmon streams. This variant is called nitrogen 15, and it comes from the ocean. So, how did it find its way from the sea into the forest? Well, it swam there in the bodies of spawning salmon loaded with marine nutrients from their time at sea. But how exactly does it get into the trees? Well, bears have a lot to do with this. Now, bears don't particularly like being around other bears, so when they catch a fish, they will often carry it away from the stream and into the woods. Turns out that bears can move a lot of salmon into the forest. Researchers say that one bear can carry 40 fish from a stream in just 8 hours. Now, toward the end of a good salmon season, the bears can afford to be picky and they usually target the richest parts of the fish and they leave the rest behind. Other animals scavenge on these carcasses. This spreads the nutrients farther throughout the forest. Well, guess what happens? All of this rich fish fertilizer decomposes into the soil, and the trees and other vegetation absorb it through their roots. Scientists have actually traced nitrogen 15 in trees near salmon streams that links directly back to the fish. And that is how salmon end up in the trees. Now, how cool is that? I've given that particular talk many, many, many times, and I get goosebumps every single time I do. It's so cool that I did an entire book on this particular topic called What Else? Salmon in the Trees. Now, for this book, The Salmon Way, a lot of people have asked me how I made this cover photo that's on the book. So I had this idea, and this is real, by the way. Not a single bit of it was altered in any way, shape, or form. This happened right in front of me. But I had this idea in my mind that I wanted to make a photograph that spoke to the concept of salmon as a life force. But this is difficult to capture and show when the salmon are still alive. So somehow I needed to make a photograph of a live, vibrant salmon providing life for something else. And so to do this, I went to a place called McNeil River. This is on the northeast side of the Alaska Peninsula. There's a story in the book about my time at McNeil River, and I'd like to read just a part of it to you now. Weighing more than half a ton, a bear named Rocky ambles toward me. He has scars on his face and shoulders and tattered skin on his sides. He's a fighter, hence his name, and he's healthy. His belly almost scrapes the ground. His enormous head melds into his massive girth, and each paw is bigger than my head. He's hungry. And fortunately for Rocky and me, there's a river full of fish, just steps from where he stands and I sit at the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary. Established in 1967, the 200 square mile sanctuary is protected wildlife habitat and home to the world's largest congregation of brown bears, also known as grizzly bears. As many as 144 individuals have been identified in a single summer, with 74 bears observed at one time. From early July through mid August, chum salmon return to the McNeil River to spawn. About a mile upstream from the river's mouth, the McNeil River Falls create a salmon traffic jam, providing excellent fishing opportunities for bears and outstanding bear viewing experiences for humans. And that's why I'm here, along with 9 other lucky Homo sapiens who won 4-day bear viewing permits in a lottery system through the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Now, if it weren't for salmon, we wouldn't be here. And if it weren't for salmon, people who came to McNeil long before it was designated a wildlife sanctuary probably wouldn't have been here either. The camp where we pitched our tents is pocked with shallow depressions in the ground. This is evidence of semi-subterranean dwellings of people who were most likely nomadic. I can envision them arriving in the summer to harvest salmon. Perhaps they took steam baths fueled by driftwood from the beach, not far from today's wood-fired sauna overlooking a lily pond. They would have shared food, chores, and laughter, not unlike us, sharing peanut butter, hauling water, and swapping stories. And while they didn't come here to watch bears, they undoubtedly viewed them with respect. Everything we do, eat, sleep, walk, and talk, is done with respect for the bears and their home. We sit quietly near the roaring river. Rocky faces the falls in solid defiance of the oncoming water, tumbling over the boulders and swirling past his legs. He darts his head into the churning water and emerges triumphant with a flopping fish. It's a female, and as the clamp of the big Bruin's teeth forces the eggs from her body, in that moment, her life force is transferred to his. Watching this age-old scene of predator pursuing prey in a setting devoid of roads, motorized vehicles, crowds of people, or cell phone coverage triggers something deep within us. That wild part of our DNA, long dormant, awakens from its domesticated slumber. Places like the McNeil Sanctuary make us feel alive, not because we're seeking a thrill, but because what we didn't know we were missing reintroduces itself. Connecting to our true nature makes us whole. So I think that many people are drawn to salmon because in salmon we see a bit of ourselves. I know I certainly do. Salmon show all who encounter them that life is a dance of rhythms, balance, and strength. Through twists and turns, ups and downs, we learn to trust the unseen and bow with grace for the time we are here. From the fish, we learn what it means to be a part of the world, what it means to be human, and what it means to be. Salmon are a gift, and I heard that word over and over. They're a gift to the land, water, animals, plants, and people. And when you're on the receiving end of a gift, you give thanks and you give back and you take care of what takes care of you. It's the salmon way. Everywhere I went, from remote villages to urban cities, whether I met with people for 10 minutes or 10 days, I always seemed to leave with salmon in my hands. I was so touched by the generosity that the salmon people showed me. I learned that sharing is the Alaska way, and it goes beyond food and includes sharing things like firewood, laughter, sweat, and tears. This generosity of spirit forges relationships, and relationships create communities. Throughout my travels, I asked everyone another question. What would your life be like without salmon? Everyone pretty much gave me the same answer. Without salmon, there would be no community. That's what salmon do. They connect us to each other, to a home stream, and to our true nature. Emma Lakaitis, she's a young commercial fisherman from Homer, and she says, salmon have given all Alaskans a common language, a set of values, something to believe in and hope for. Reuben Hastings, he's a young Alaska native sport fishing guide from Bristol Bay, and he says, watching salmon, you see that life isn't just a straight line that ends at the finish line. Both Emma and Reuben hope that their generation and beyond can continue the salmon way of life. Now, for many Alaskans who don't make their living from salmon or live a subsistence way of life, their connection to salmon runs deep, catching their own fish and sharing the bounty with others, because food always tastes best when it's shared. And I wish more than anything that I could live this salmon way of life where I live in Washington State. So when I look at this map, I feel both pain and hope. Now, much of the hope lies north in Alaska, but let's talk about the pain first. The once staggering runs of salmon in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and southern British Columbia are now less than 10% of their historical abundance. How did this happen? Well, beginning in the late 1700s, an increasingly industrial way of life systematically decimated salmon and their habitat, creek by creek, river by river. A culture that valued short term profits and commodities dominated cultures that valued long term relationships with their natural communities. Damming rivers to power factories and energy grids, dumping toxic waste into waterways, diverting water from rivers to irrigate crops, overfishing, and deforestation. These are just a handful of the crimes against salmon that led to their demise. Now, plenty of people objected, but the voices of those who stood for salmon were steamrolled. And when the salmon vanished, entire ways of life went with them. The gift of salmon was gone, and the relationships, communities, and cultures were largely lost. So, this is the Columbia River, 66 miles from its mouth along the border of Washington and Oregon. The 1,200-mile Columbia River, this was once one of the greatest salmon producing systems on Earth. Now, like many of the lower 48 rivers where salmon once thrived, we lost salmon in the Columbia due to overharvest, habitat destruction, hydroelectric dams, and substituting hatcheries for habitat. At 146 miles from the mouth of the Columbia is the Bonneville Dam. This is the first of many built on this river system. At the dam's visitor center, there's an exhibit, and it talks about dam construction and what it brought to the region. One sign in particular stands out to me in the exhibit. So, what is wealth, living, and happiness? And who decides? The native people, whose entire way of life was connected to this free flowing river, who gathered for millennia for the seasonal bounty of salmon and to renew ties with family and friends, how would they define wealth, living, and happiness? When we overfished, dammed, and polluted the mighty Columbia, we traded one form of wealth for another. We traded a way of life for another. Yes, we may have gained things, but we also lost. A river without its salmon is a river without its soul. And this story has repeated itself most everywhere in the world where there were salmon on both sides of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Now, let's talk about hope. You've seen how the salmon people of Alaska define wealth, living, and happiness. A full smokehouse, a connection to a home stream and community, gathering with family and friends, sharing the seasonal bounty, and passing all of this to the next generations. There is a strong belief among Alaska natives that if they respect the salmon, the fish will come back every year and give themselves to the people. I think that's the basis for any healthy relationship, respect. If we want these salmon relationships to continue, we have to continue to respect salmon and give them what they need: clean, cool, healthy, fresh water to spawn and rear, and a thriving ocean to mature. Now, I'd like to highlight a couple folks who are working to ensure that salmon have a future in Alaska. Sue Mauger, she's a stream ecologist and the science director for the Cook Inlet Keeper. This is an organization that works to conserve the Cook Inlet watershed and the way of life it supports throughout Alaska. In 2008, Sue and Cook Inlet Keeper, they coordinated a team of state and federal agencies, as well as nonprofit and community groups, to create and implement a stream temperature monitoring network in this watershed. So, as cold-blooded creatures, salmon depend on the water temperature of their environment for the regulation of their body temperature. And Sue helped me understand what happens to the fish when water temperatures rise, something that occurred in the summer of 2019 with record temperatures throughout Alaska, and something we might see more of in the future with the changing climate. So she told me that water temperatures above 55 degrees Fahrenheit, they bring increasing stress to salmon. Above 68 degrees, the fish are less likely to avoid predators and successfully spawn. And at 77 degrees and higher, they don't have the energy to spawn and survive the freshwater phase of their life. So, understanding which stream systems across a landscape are prone to warming and which are likely to remain unchanged, this will help land managers prioritize conservation strategies to increase the resiliency of salmon to a changing climate. This is absolutely critical work. Ted Otis, he's there on the left. He's a research biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And I spent time with him and other folks within the department to get an idea of what they do to manage salmon. I had no idea how you manage salmon. And I learned just how much information and data is behind any decision that might allow or restrict fishing. So things like fish forecasts, test fisheries, escapement reports, genetic analyses, historical records, and much more. And Ted helped me understand that Alaska still has abundant salmon runs because the habitat remains largely intact. He also stressed how important genetic diversity is to salmon, and he cited Bristol Bay as a great example of diverse salmon habitat that fosters stability within and across salmon populations, making them more resilient to environmental change. The time I spent throughout the state with the men and women of Fish and Game made me realize that they often work in very challenging conditions, sometimes quite dangerous, and it can be a thankless job at times. But everyone I met was passionate about making sure that Alaska is the place where there will always be salmon to catch. In fact, Alaska is one of the few places left in the world where salmon can still thrive, where salmon people live connected to the fish with an appreciation for what nourishes both body and spirit. And while I've set out to tell stories in my book that celebrate the salmon way, there's also a cautionary tale to tell. Bristol Bay, home to the world's largest run of sockeye salmon, has been under threat for the past 20 years or so by the proposed Pebble Mine. This mine, it was poised to be the world's largest open pit gold mine at the headwaters of two of the most important rivers that feed Bristol Bay. In January 2023, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a final determination under the Clean Water Act to veto the Pebble Mine. An extensive assessment that included scientific findings and traditional indigenous knowledge of Bristol Bay helped to inform this decision. Radhika Fox, she's on the right. She was the assistant administrator for water with the EPA, and she made the final determination. And presenting her with my book, The Salmon Way, this is Carla Jensen of the United Tribes of Bristol Bay. So I always like to say that when science, traditional knowledge, art, and stories all come together, this is really powerful stuff. In other parts of the state, those transboundary rivers in southeast Alaska, these are threatened by pollution from current and proposed Canadian mining operations. All toxins flow downstream, so you can see how that would be problematic. There are some salmon runs that are in decline, including those of the Kuskokwim and Yukon rivers, and there are always new proposals to dam, dredge, and degrade more salmon habitat, including building new roads in the Great Salmon Forest of the Tongass National Forest. In January 2023, the U.S. Department of Agriculture restored what are called the roadless rule protections to more than 9 million acres of the Tongass, stating that this forest is key to conserving biodiversity and addressing the climate crisis. Today, those roadless rule protections are under threat of being removed yet again. So, Alaska is a place where history does not have to repeat itself, where salmon still endure, where we have an incredible opportunity to leave a salmon-filled legacy. And I think that's why we should care about salmon in Alaska, regardless of where we live. Alaska shows us what healthy salmon ecosystems look like. And what a salmon ecosystem could be once again, whether it's on the Pacific coast or the Atlantic coast with Atlantic salmon. So throughout my travels, I asked everyone I met how he or she values salmon. Not a single person responded with financial figures. Instead, all of the answers spoke to the relationship instead of the resource. And it didn't matter if the people I asked the question to fish for their food, their livelihood, culture, or fun. Everyone gave me the same answers: family, community, culture, well being, and way of life. Values too precious to reduce to dollars and cents, and senseless to try. So today is we're celebrating and defending that Alaska is still a place where salmon are the lifeblood, where the salmon way is still a way of life. And so I dedicate this talk and my book to the salmon people. May your lives always pulse with the beauty and mystery of your home streams, and to the salmon, may you always come home. And all of you, I leave you with the greatest lesson that salmon have taught me. Life's short. Be a life force with the time you're given and give it everything you've got. Thank you. And I am more than happy to take any questions that you might have. I think
Thank
we,
you, Amy. That was that was very interesting and really nice. So I have some questions, and
yeah,
then um, if anyone else has a question, you can either put it in the chat, or I'm very okay if you just want to turn your camera on and unmute yourselves and ask. I see Jean popped up. Do you have a question?
No, but a comment. Hold on. I want to turn on some light. Um,
Sure.
um, Amy, I can't tell you how I enjoyed this talk. It was, oh, wait a second. I had the good fortune of living and working in Alaska. I was the physician at Alaska Native Medical Center, and they always flew me out like to places like Bethel and Kotzebue and the peninsula. And just 2 months ago, I did a cruise, National Geographic cruise, along the Inside Passage, and
Right.
was astounded by the amount of salmon that we saw, including thousands that were dead along the sides of the river. I don't know if those were the bears who did that, or they jumped out and just didn't survive. But
It's both. It's both for sure.
okay, it
Yeah.
was Alaska is one of my favorite places in the world, and I also am a photographer and a very good friend of Frans Lanting, who you
Oh
probably,
yeah.
yeah, I traveled with him a lot and to the most remote places on earth. And I'm sure you knew him
I
quite
do.
well.
I do.
But again, thank you so much. I so enjoyed this talk, and I'm gonna buy your book.
Oh, thank you. I mean, again, I'm not trying, I'm a terrible salesperson. I'm not trying to sell anybody a book, but the stories in that book, that's why I say ask your library to carry it if you don't actually want to buy the
I
book.
will I will do that too. I happen to be on the board of RTPI, but was
Yeah,
just
yeah,
Oh, excellent.
yeah.
a, a great joy. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah, you're so welcome. No, the again, the story I could have worked on this book forever. Sitting down with people and just asking them. I didn't realize just how heartfelt all these stories were going to be, when I first went into it. And but I just wanted to ask people very basic questions. It's just, tell me, what does salmon mean to you? That was kind of
Mhm.
really, I mean, I asked other questions, but that was the gist. And I think the people who surprised me the most were kind of like the big, gruff, burly commercial fishermen that were, that are kind of intimidating. They're almost kind of pirate-like. And oh my goodness. I mean, the stories that came out of, I mean, some of them were just weeping, weeping with tears of joy, because they understood what these fish meant to them and their family and to where they live, and so they surprised me, but I guess they shouldn't have. Why wouldn't they feel that? But for some reason they did, and I'm glad we got through like the stereotype.
Right,
and,
right.
I
but
have one.
salmon do that, right? Salmon will do that. It's like
Yeah.
start it. Someone else told me, I said, what does salmon mean to you? And she said, oh my gosh, she just said salmon are like breathing. Like
Mm.
if we didn't have salmon, we wouldn't be able to breathe. And I'm like, wow. That was a powerful one.
I have one more question for you. One of the towns that I frequently went to do their obstetrical clinics was Bethel along the Kuskokwim Delta. And I went out with these people in their boat and I just loved it. But I know that Bethel recently was totally destroyed by a hurricane. Isn't that, do you know anything about that?
I think that was further north. That was Kotzebue, and
Oh, Kotzebue?
yeah, yeah, it was to the best of my knowledge, it was not Bethel. Kotzebue definitely got flooded, and then Kipnuk, another village. I think that was completely. I think almost everybody had to evacuate, and yeah, and we're seeing a lot more of that, with climate change and sea level rise. And these villages, particularly in coastal Western Alaska, there's a reason that the villages are where they are. I mean, this is their lifeblood. It's their food source. It's everything to them. So, it's kind of hard for us sometimes to understand, well, why would you live that close to the coast? And it's like, well, they weren't that close. It's just the coast is, continued to encroach. And then, but moving a village, and there are a couple villages that have actually done this, and I mean, it's billions of dollars. So it's not like this is terribly easy for people to do. And then other people who, again, don't understand village life or native culture, you might say, well, why can't they just all move to Anchorage, or Juneau or like these larger cities? And Some people have, but it's just it really destroys who they are as a people. And I again, that's hard for us to understand because we're not terribly connected or attached for thousands and thousands of generations of our ancestors to a specific place. So it's much more complicated than I think people understand. But yeah, it's yeah, the remnant of that last typhoon that hit the Western Alaska was yeah, particularly devastating.
Mhm. Jeez.
Mhm.
Oh, and so just because the amount of like places you visited and like people you talked to, how do you go about like doing that? Like what was your like did you just show up and go, "Oh, I'll just see what happens?" Did you have like a sort of couple months, couple week plan? I'm just curious because you covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, that's a really good story. And I'm laughing because the way I like to do my work, like my research in particular, I like to be what I think is being very polite to other people and giving them a lot of advance notice.
Mhm.
And I like to plan things because a lot of these areas, getting to them is tricky, it's challenging, and I need to be there when the salmon are coming in. So I need to be there at their busiest time of year, which is really a ridiculous request actually for a stranger to show up and say, "Hey, can I hang out with you in your busiest time of year?" Whether they're native folks, whether they're commercial fishermen, it doesn't matter. That's like this is for most people like this is their way to put up their winter food or make most of their income during a pretty short amount of time. So anyway, I thought I was being very polite by particularly in native villages, and as Jean can attest to. You don't just show up to a native village. Depending on the size of the village, there may not be much in the way, or anything really in the way of infrastructure. There won't be hotels. There might not be a grocery store. It's like you don't just show up because there might not be a place to stay. There's no food for you. So
Mhm.
it's tricky. And it's not that people won't help you, but they're just going to kind of look at you like, why are you here? What are you doing here? So you really have to make inroads and try and get in touch with people and hopefully someone will agree to kind of be your host
Mhm.
and help you out. And in many places that did happen, but in the more remote places like in the Yukon Kuskokwim area, I was really striking out. I mean, I was networking and I was, getting names of people. I was actually getting a hold of people and so I'd call people in January, and their real busy time of year is June, with
Sure.
someone coming in. But I call them well in advance, and it's like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Do you think it might be okay if I came and observe your fish camp and and kind of what you do in your relationship with salmon? And some people would just say, why are you calling in January? Call back in June. Call back when the salmon are running. Click.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then other some people actually knew. They said, "No, I'm not going to be here this year." So they'd say no. And then most people though said maybe. It was just kind of a one-word answer, maybe. And again, these are remote places, it's expensive, it's like I was feeling like I don't think I can go on a maybe. I really need like a commitment from somebody. But finally, somebody explained to me, a native man who walks in both worlds well, both his native culture and the non-native cultures, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Okay, you have to understand what it means when we say maybe. Maybe
Mhm.
means we'll do everything we can to help you, if you come out here. But maybe an elder is sick and needs us that day. Maybe a child needs us. Maybe our boat broke down. Maybe the firewood pile is empty and needs replenishing because that's their whole source of heat.
Mhm.
Maybe, maybe, maybe. And so he said, if they say maybe, that is as good as it's going to get, and you should go.
Mhm.
But he also said, but don't think that you're going to go there and everyone's going to drop what they're doing and revolve around you and your needs. It's like you need to just go, not make a return flight, so there's no pressure on your end, and just stay there a while, and see what happens. And it
Mhm.
was the best advice anybody ever gave me for this particular project. And that's what I ended up doing, particularly in the more remote villages. And if you have time, I have a really kind of funny story So again, the Yukon-Kuskokwim area. I kind of have Facebook to thank for some of my contacts up there. So salmon people all kind of find each other, and on
Hmm.
Facebook, we all kind of find each other. And so there are a lot of people on my Facebook friends list that I've never met before, but somehow they are connected to salmon. Um, and when I was trying to find somebody in on the Kuskokwim River, somehow I remembered it's like, hey, I think that guy who's on my Facebook feed, I think he's like a salmon biologist, and I think he lives in a village in on the Kuskokwim. So I get a hold of him through Facebook. He's all excited. He's like, yes, come out. You can stay with me. I will skiff you up and down the river. I'll take you to people's, like golden, right? Like that's exactly what you want to happen. He was wonderful. But I was still striking out on the Yukon. I knew I really needed to go to the Yukon too. So while I was with him on the Kuskokwim, we went into somebody's smokehouse. I was inside the smokehouse photographing beautiful salmon hanging from in the smokehouse, and he took a picture of me doing that, and he posted the picture of me photographing salmon on his Facebook feed. And a friend of mine back in Seattle saw it, and he emailed me right away, and he said, "Are you going to the Yukon by any chance?" And I said, "I've been trying to get into the Yukon for a long time, and I'm not having any luck." And he said, "Give me 10 minutes." And so 10 minutes later, he emails me back, and he said, here's this number. Call Jack. He's on the Yukon. He runs a fish processing plant. It's in a native village. He's expecting your call. I'm like, wow. Call Jack, and Jack had actually been referred to me by other people like long before that, but they all kind of said he's really gruff. He's super busy guy. He's very connected up there, but he's probably not going to give you the time of day. So I never bothered with him. So here I am circling back to, big gruff Jack, and he was very gruff on the phone and very brief, and but he said, well, just get out here. And I'm like, well, okay, where's here? And he tells me where. I'm like, okay, how do I get there? And he's like, they're fine. Just get out here. And you can tell he's just ready to hang up the phone. He's putting out fires all the time. So where am I going to stay? He said, well, you'll stay with us. And I thought us meant, his family. I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea. But all I knew, I had a commitment. It's like, get out here. You can stay with us. I'm like, all right. 2 days later, I'm on this little plane, going out to a village called Imanic, and one of my worst nightmares in all of this whole project was getting to a very remote village. The airplane takes off, and there I am sitting on a gravel runway on all my gear, and there's nobody. I have no food, and I have no place to stay. That was always my worst nightmare. So we fly into Imanic, again, little tiny plane, gravel runway. Everybody gets out of the plane and they all just scatter. And there I am sitting on a gravel runway on my gear, and there's nobody there. Because Jack said, "Oh, we'll meet you on the plane." It's like, well, there was nobody there to pick me up. So, of course, my cell phone doesn't work, in a place like that. I did manage to find there was actually a person like in kind of a little shack somewhere. Shack meaning like it was like part of the runway infrastructure. Um, and there was an old rotary telephone there, the kind that's so heavy you could bludgeon somebody with it, the kind my grandmother used to have. And so I was able to, I call up Jack and I said, Jack, hi, this is Amy. And he's like, Amy who? And this was just 2 days ago that I talked to him. I'm like, oh no, he's like, confused. And
Uh-oh.
I'm like, oh, help, here I am stranded because there's no plane, it took off. And I'm like, remember, the friend, oh, all right. Oh, well, where are you? And I said, I'm at the airport. And he's like, oh, all right, someone will come get you. So right out of a movie scene, this pickup truck just roaring down this gravel runway and just skids on the brakes, and all of this dust just goes flying like right in my face. Anyway, and it's Jack. He leans out of the window. He doesn't even get out of the truck. He's like, "Well, get in." So
Great.
throw my stuff in the back, and we're rumbling down down this pothole, road, and we show up to what feels to me like a real industrial kind of area because it's a fish processing plant. And they had just had a major fire, and so there's a lot. They're trying to rebuild 2 buildings. It's in the height of their fishing season, the whole bit. And so where I was staying was in what's called a man camp, and it's a bunch of just trailers all kind of ramshackled together. And but and I remember thinking it's like, oh, I'm not gonna last long here. This is gonna be rough. And I don't even know if I don't and I would what the whole lasting long part, it's like I don't think I'm gonna get what I need. Like I wanted to get out
Oh,
to like fishing camps and traditional like camps. And so here I am in this kind of industrial fish processing plant. And but no, I was able to stay in the man camp. There was a cafeteria, like so everything I needed was there, which was phenomenal. And then here's the magic of all this. So Jack again knows everybody up and down the river, all these different villages that fish, for the plant and supply the plant. And they're all native villages. And so he just introduced me to the skiff drivers who are running up and down the river every single day, like making supply runs. And he said, here's Amy, here's what she's trying to do, do your supply runs, but when you can stop by someone's fish camp, because it was going on everywhere on the river, just stop by and say hi to folks. And so that's what I did. And I tell you, after the first day, I did not want to leave. I could have stayed there all summer. So it all worked out. And,
yeah.
and I apologize if this is a long story, but it all worked out. And I I have a whole new appreciation for planning and how people live their lives. And the one thing, well, many salmon have taught me many things, but I think the most important thing is living in the present and being present. And that as much as we plan and try and plan ahead, it's like that's not really how life works, and it's not how it
Mhm.
unfolds. And sometimes I think we just cause ourselves more anxiety and grief when we're trying to plan and control everything. And salmon, and particularly the people who live with them, they've really taught me a lot about just being present because that's their whole culture. Because their whole cultures revolve around whatever's happening in the season that they're in at the time.
Mhm.
Because if your whole life revolves around, fishing, picking berries, hunting moose, or whatever is available to you, you're going to pay really close attention to, well, are the salmon in? Because the salmon don't come in like clockwork, on the day that we want them to come in. Gene, you'll appreciate this in Bethel when I spent probably about a good week in Bethel. And the salmon were coming in. And I remember there was one woman I was trying to track down in town, and I found her. She had a storefront, and I found the store. And but the door was locked, even though the hours said we're open. And there was this little tiny piece of paper, like just wedged into the door by the door handle, and it just said cutting fish. That's all it said. And I knew exactly what that meant. It's just like you drop everything and you go out and you cut fish because that's when they're coming in. And that's the challenge that, that these villages and native folks face today in the modern world. It's like they've been thrust into what's called a mixed economy, which means they're still practicing their traditional ways of life, and yet they have to earn cash in some way too. So it's really difficult for them. It's like, okay, they have a job, they have to show up for their job, but then all their winter food is now showing up while they're still trying to work like what we consider a modern job. So
Mhm.
it's doubly hard, for them. But I told that little piece of paper just said it all, cutting fish.
That's funny.
Yeah. Again, I could go on and on about salmon forever, and I know I don't want to take up any more time. So
Oh no, you're fine. Well, so I know we're a little bit over, but I didn't know. So during our tech run, you had mentioned that there was a new project you were working on. Did you want to talk a little about that, or if you want to keep it close to the chest, that's totally fine.
no, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it's just the three of us here. Yeah. So I've started to look at the rufous hummingbird.
Hmm.
That's a bird. So I live on the West Coast, so I live in their breeding range. So, but it's a migratory bird. It's the longest migration of any hummingbird in the world, and it's the northernmost migration of any hummingbird in the world. They go all the way up to Alaska. And then they go down to Mexico. That's their wintering range. And through Cornell Lab of Ornithology, I learned not too long ago that the rufous is on what's called the tipping point list. So they're not listed as endangered or threatened under the Endangered Species Act, but there's been this tipping point list that's been compiled, and it keeps growing, unfortunately. So the way they define tipping point is A species that's lost 50% of its population over the last 50 years, and it's on track to lose 50% of its remaining population over the next 50 years if something doesn't happen, if something doesn't change.
Mhm.
And so I'm flipping through Cornell Labs magazine, and here's this, these tipping point species, and little mug shots. Like there was nothing beautiful about any of these shots. They looked like they were all in a jail lineup, And I'm looking through all of them. I'm like, oh no, not that one, not that one. Okay, I don't really know what that one is, but huh. And then I get to Rufus, and I just stopped me dead in my tracks. I'm like, I had no
Mhm.
idea, that species was in trouble. So yeah, the next project is, a journey to find out why, like what's happening
Mhm.
to them, and what we can do. And the hopeful thing for me is what I've been finding is like everybody loves hummingbirds. I don't think I've met
Mhm.
anybody who doesn't. But most people, even if they're very avid about feeding hummingbirds and they love to see them all the time, they don't really know what they're looking at. They don't know what species they're
Mhm.
looking at. They don't know where that bird goes, where it came from. They don't really know its needs, other than they need to go out and fill up a feeder.
Right, right.
So I feel like we already have this captive audience, as far as hummingbirds go, and birds in general, right? There's so many people who love birds. So I'm just hoping to impart a little bit more knowledge about something that they already deeply care about.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the plan. We'll see. Again, we can plan all you want, and we'll see how it works.
Right, right. I just thought that might be fun, so when people watch this later, they know to keep an eye out in the
Yeah,
future.
it'll be a number of years. I'm just kind of getting going into it, but yeah, it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, still in the data gathering stage, and that's okay. Like, that's an important phase. All
It is.
right, here, I'm just going to stop the recording for now. All right.